So, friends, in the previous lecture, I was talking to you about the different training methods that are adopted by the organizations while imparting knowledge to their employees. And now, in this lecture, let me talk to you about the several types of interviews that are commonly used by the organization in the organizations, depending on the nature and importance of the position to be filled within an organization. So I will now explain the different types of interviews. So there are what are called as the non-directive interviews, the directive interviews, situational interviews, behavioral interview, stress interview, the panel interview, traditional face-to-face interview, case interviews, telephone interview, group interviews, and even the lunch or the dinner interview, etc., etc. So now let us see all these things one by one, the details of these things one by one. So first one is the non-directive interview. So here in a non-directive interview, the recruiter asks the questions as they come to his mind, as they, as it may come to their minds. There is no specific format to be followed, and the question can take any direction. And the interviewer asks, broad, open-ended questions such as, tell me more about what you did on your, in your last job. And he allows the applicant to talk freely with a minimum of interruption. But difficulty in this method is keeping it job related and also obtaining a comparable data of various applicants on performance. It becomes a little difficult. Whereas in the case of directive or structured interview, so in the directive interview, the recruiter uses a predetermined set of questions that are clearly job related. And since every applicant is asked more or less the same basic questions, the comparison of performance among applicants it can be made more easy. And the structured questions they eliminate bias that may stand a legal challenge tomorrow. And on the negative side, the whole process is somewhat mechanical, and this directive or structured interview it definitely restricts the freedom of the interviewers, and it may even, convey a disinterest to the applicants who are used to more flexible interviews. And number three, let us see the situational interviews. See, one variation of the structured interview and this situational interview is that in this approach, the applicant is confronted with a hypothetical incident and he is asked how he or she would respond to it. So the applicant's response is then evaluated relative to the pre-established benchmark standards. And coming to the behavioral interview, this focuses on the actual work incidents as against the hypothetical questions, hypothetical situations in the situational interviews. So the applicant is supposed to reveal what he or she did in a given situation. And the basic premise behind this type of interview is that your past behavior is the best predictor of your future actions. So that is the assumption. So that must be answered based on the facts, and the interviewer is definitely looking for the results, the outcome, and not just an activity list, and especially what your role was in achieving that outcome. For example, have you disciplined an employee who was smoking inside the factory premises and things like that. And then comes the stress interview. So here the interviewer, he attempts to find how applicant would respond to aggressive, embarrassing, rude, and the insulting questions. So the whole exercise is meant to see whether the applicant can cope up with highly stress-producing, anxious, and demanding situations while at work in a calm and composed manner. So such an approach may be a backfire also, because the typical applicant is already somewhat anxious in any interview. So the applicant that the firm wants to be hired, he might even turn down the job offered under such a trying conditions. And coming to the panel interview, so in a typical panel interview, the applicant meets with 3 to 5 interviewers who take turns asking questions. And after the interview, the interviewers, they pool their observations to arrive at a conscious decision about the suitability of the applicant or otherwise. And the panel members, they can also ask new questions based on their expertise and experience, and they can elicit, they can extract deeper and more meaningful responses from the candidates. So a panel interview may make you feel more stressed than usual. And then comes this traditional face-to-face interview, which is more common. So most interviews are face-to-face interviews, and the most traditional is this one-to-one conversation. So your focus should be on the person asking the questions. So you have to maintain eye contact, listen and respond once a question is asked, and your goal is to establish the rapport with the interviewer and show them that your qualifications will benefit their organization. And the other type of interview is the case interview. So here in some interviews, you may be asked to demonstrate your problem solving skills. The interviewer, he will outline a situation or provide you with a case study and ask you to formulate a plan that deals with the problem. So you do not have to come up with the ultimate solution. The interviewers are looking for how you apply your knowledge and skills to a real life situation. So speak and reason, I mean, aloud. So interviewers, they have a full understanding of your thought process. So before answering a case interview question, you should be prepared to ask the employer numerous questions for, clarity and the informational purposes. So most employees will provide responses that could result in additional inquiries, additional questions. So the more you are able to analyze and dissect the case study, the more you will likely to impress your interviewer. So this is the only interview for which it is acceptable, even encouraged to bring a pad, a paper, a pencil. So most interviewers will allow you to take notes and jot down the thoughts as you work through the case. And the other type of interview is the telephone interview. So many organizations these days, they conduct the interviews by telephone to narrow a field of candidates. So telephone interviews, they may also be used as a preliminary interview sometimes for the candidates who live far away from the job site. And it is important to treat this interview as you would, attend a face-to-face connection, or as you attend a face-to-face interview. So arrange for a quiet space and time to schedule the conversation, and a clear work surface to minimize the distractions. Focus on the conversation, listen to the questions carefully before you answer them. And since your voice is a key factor which conveys the energy with, with your real talent, so you should see that your voice is not interrupted. Have a copy of your resume nearby as a reference, and also avoid using a phone with call waiting. So you do not want to be interrupted during an interview, so try to use a landline phone or a cell phone that is not prone to dropping the calls. And lastly, the group interview. See, a group interview is usually designed to uncover the leadership potential of prospective managers and employees who will be dealing with the customers. So the front runner candidates, they are gathered together in an informal discussion type interview. So there is not one candidate but a group of candidates. So a subject is introduced and the interviewer will start up the discussion. So the goal of the group interview is to see how you interact with others and how you use your knowledge and reasoning to influence the others. And of course, there are also not very important. The lunch or dinner interviews are also conducted these days. So same rules apply at a meal as those in an office. So the setting may be more casual, but remember that it is a business meal and you're being watched carefully in both selection of the food and etiquette. So avoid the messy foods. Do not drink alcohol at any point of time in this part of the interview process. And you observe all things carefully as you do in the other methods of training. So thank you very much, friend. These were in brief the various methods of training that are, various methods of interviews that are conducted by the employers or the recruiters to recruit the quality candidates for their organization.